first of these concepts is the recovery point objective. A recovery point objective tells us how much data can be lost in the event that we have to invoke DR, that is, bring up our services running off the remote replicas. Now, when it comes to recovery point objectives, smaller is definitely better. A recovery point objective of 5 minutes tells us that our data at our remote site will be a maximum of 5 minutes behind the data in our live production site. So with a recovery point objective or an RPO of 5 minutes, if we need to bring the business back up on our remote replicators, we'll only have lost up to a maximum of 5 minutes worth of data. But that can be a lot. Imagine, for instance, you've just paid off your mortgage in a lump sum at 1:35 in the afternoon, and then at 1:39 the bank loses its primary site and it has to invoke DR. But the bank's operating with a 5-minute RPO, meaning the data at the DR site will be from 1:34 p.m, critically 1 minute before you paid off your mortgage, meaning that they've lost all record of that payment. You'd be none too happy, right? Though I'm sure things would be worked out in the long run. Anyway, because data is so important to the company, things like recovery point objectives have to be signed off and agreed by appropriate people within the business. And they'll form part of a larger overall service level agreement between IT and the business. And as an IT administrator or even an IT manager, you'll almost certainly not be vested with the kind of authority to make decisions about what appropriate RPOs are for the business. These kinds of decisions tend to be made by folks getting paid a lot more money than you and I. Now then, sometimes the technologies you deploy will dictate things like RPO. For example, it's quite common for application and hypervisor-based replication engines not to provide very small RPOs. VMware's vSphere replication, in its current version, supports a minimum RPO of 15 minutes. And for some businesses and for some use cases, that just won't be acceptable. So be really careful when choosing technologies. Make sure that they match your requirements. Now, for recovery time objective. Even though recovery time objective sounds a lot like recovery point objective, the two are totally different, though linked in many ways. While recovery point objective refers to the point in time to which you can recover the business, such as 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes before a disaster strikes, recovery time objective is all about how long it takes you to get that business back up and running. For example, although you may have an RPO of 5 minutes for a particular application or service, meaning the business will expect that service to be as it was 5 minutes before the disaster happened, if you have a recovery time objective of 2 hours for that application, this means that it'll be 2 hours after the disaster before the service is available again. So, say we experienced a disaster at 9:05 in the morning and we have an RPO of 5 minutes and an RTO of 2 hours. It'll be 11:05 in the morning before the business should expect to have the service back and available for use, and it should expect that service to be exactly as it was at 9 a.m. 5 minutes before the disaster occurred. So again, it's obviously critical that RTOs are also agreed with the business and mapped to formal SLAs. And a quick point, RPO and RTO can be applied to individual apps, tiers of apps, or even the entire IT estate. It all depends on what you agree with your business and what you design for. But you probably want better RPO and RTO levels for your core trading apps and your core business apps, certainly better than you do for maybe something like contract employee time recording systems. Also, when considering RTOs, there are a lot of non-technical things to consider. For example, if disaster strikes at 8 in the evening and nobody's in the office, or even worse, it's the office Christmas party and everyone's out having a good time, then it's obviously going to take a little while to muster staff and get people logged on and working on the recovery. Things like this really need to be factored into RTOs, as well as considered when planning things like office parties and vacations. If you're a true global 24/7 by 365 business, then unfortunately some folks are just going to have to be available and in a fit state to work during things like office parties and national holidays and the likes. So, let's summarize the lesson.